Day 4 of Peace Week and day 95 of the 99 days of peace through unity. And today we're talking and focusing on the core need of vitalizing food. We've had a wonderful 3 days looking at the core needs of living soil and also, of course, healthy water yesterday. So we're up to day 3. Day 3 of the of Peace Week. Excuse me. So we're very honoured today to have a wonderful panel joining us, which is a panel of 4. We're just waiting on some technical with our other speakers, but let me introduce who we've got here. We have Helena Norberg-Hodge. Helena is a pioneer of the new economy movement. Is the founder and director of the international non-profit organization Local Futures and the convener of World Localization Day. She is author of the interspiritual classic Ancient Futures and Local is Our Future, and producer of the award-winning documentary The Economics of Happiness. She is a founder of the International Alliance for Localization and a co-founder of the International Forum on Globalization and the Global Eco-Village Network. Helena is a recipient of the Alternative Nobel Prize, the Arthur Morgan Award, and the Goy Peace Prize for contributing to the revitalization of cultural and biological diversity and the strengthening of local communities and economies worldwide. Helena, welcome to Peace Week. Let's get you unmuted there, but
Thank you.
Wonderful to have you with us, and looking forward to your sharing today. Let me also introduce Will Tuttle. Will's a visionary author of the acclaimed bestseller, The World Peace Diet. Published in 17 languages, is a recipient of the Courage of Conscious Award and the Empty Cages Prize. He's also the author of Your Inner Islands on developing intuition, as well as editor of 2 other books, Circles of Compassion on the interconnection of social justice issues and Buddhism, and Veganism on the connection between animal liberation and spiritual awakening. Dr. Tuttle's PhD from the University of California, Berkeley, focused on educating intuition and altruism in adults, and his doctoral dissertation was nominated for the Best Dissertation Award. He has taught college courses in philosophy, humanities, mythology, religion, and creativity. A former Zen Buddhist monk and a Dharma master in the Korean Zen tradition, Dr. Tuttle is a noted composer and pianist. He has created 10 CD albums of uplifting original piano music, as well as several spoken word meditations. A vegan since 1980, he is a frequent radio, television, and online presenter and has created several wellness and advocacy training programs. Featured in Cowspiracy and other documentary films, he's a co-founder of the Worldwide Prayer Circle for Animals. So absolutely an honor to have you both with us. Will, welcome to Peace Week.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thank you.
So vitalizing food, we wanted to hear a little bit from each of you just about, Helena, for those of you who may not know too much about Local Futures and the work that you're doing and what you're currently engaged in. Just give us a few minutes of introducing yourself, and we'll have more time throughout the session today to learn more about your amazing work.
Well, everything that I have to say and all my work for the last 45 years was influenced by having a fairly unique opportunity to experience an ancient traditional culture that had not been affected by colonialism or by modern development. And it's a part of Ladakh, it's a part of Tibet known as Little Tibet or Ladakh, part of Tibet that belongs politically to India. It was sealed off from the outside world for political reasons, suddenly thrown open in the mid-70s. I arrived there as a linguist, only planning to be there for 6 weeks, fell in love and stayed in effect for 40 years, well, 45 years. My organization is still active there. I encountered the happiest, healthiest people I had ever encountered, and speaking the language fluently. I also witnessed the impact of the global economy. And after only a few years of witnessing this, I've become a critic of the globalizing economy and have been an advocate for strengthening local economies worldwide. I have seen the benefits of that in many parts of the world. I've seen that it's a win-win solution. And I've also seen that very often the spiritual movements in the West were unwittingly supporting the globalizing economic path, and that the globalizing economic path was essentially created because our governments were subsidizing and deregulating global banks and businesses and advertising it as a way of bringing the world together, creating one global village. So I think I'm very honored to be able to speak with all of you today, because I think particularly for global peace, we really need to understand this paradox that it's by creating strong community fabrics, intergenerational fabrics, that we create the identity security that every child needs to feel open and connected, and spiritually, a feeling of oneness comes about as people feel that deep experiential connection to other human beings and to the rest of creation. And that has been destroyed through this globalizing path, which actually started with enclosures, slavery, genocide, and the economic trajectory that gave so much power to global banks and businesses, as I say, started with force. There's no natural reason why we would have poor countries and rich countries. But we have often bought into also a narrative of progress, where we literally thought, because we lived in industrialized parts of the world, that we were superior to other peoples. So there's a lot of unlearning and rethinking that needs to be done to see how it is that when you have strong, healthy community fabrics, and that community includes a sense of communion with all of life. So there's so much to learn from indigenous cultures in this way. And that's what's beginning to happen. I feel optimistic about the potential that we are moving in that direction globally. There's a cultural turning in the West towards the feminine, towards the nurturing, towards respect for indigenous culture. But we need to look at what that looks like politically and economically. So that's what my work is about, and I'm very happy to be here.
Oh, wonderful, Helena. Wonderful. Well, we look forward to hearing much more about you and your incredible work. The Localization Day, World Localization Day in June 21, I think it is something that's also, I won't say coincidentally, but it happens around the same time as World Unity Week. And we've been very aware of the deep connection between those two levels of operating. So really grateful and happy to be here with you today, and looking forward to learning a lot more. Will, tell us a little bit about what's really front of mind and keeping you occupied these days after all the success you've had with the book and the books. Tell us what's holding your focus at the moment.
Right. Thank you, Ben. Thank you very much, Helena. That was really fascinating. And I look through the lens really of human domination of animals and ecosystems, and domination also of what I refer to in the World Peace Diet as the sacred feminine dimension, primarily through animal agriculture. So I really love hearing what Helena just said. I'm a strong advocate of localization, and very critical of the globalization movement, actually. But the main thrust of my work has been and continues to be to shed light on the good news, really, that all of us human beings have been given this wonderful gift, which is the gift of a physical body that does not require any animals to be imprisoned and exploited and killed to get all the nutrients that we need to celebrate our lives on this beautiful and abundant planet. The problem is, all of us have been born into a society where from the time we're little infants, we've been basically, by very well-meaning and loving people, been indoctrinated into a sense of superiority and a sense of entitlement vis-a-vis the non-human animals of the world. And so we imprison them and horribly abuse them by the billions, actually, every year, and really every day if we include marine animals. And it's unnecessary, essentially, because myself, I've been a vegan now for 42 years, and there's millions of other people like me who have been able to stop eating animal foods. And I think the more we understand how the template of animal agriculture in the outer world is devastating to the outer world, we'll begin to understand how it is also devastating to the inner landscape of our consciousness. So that's really the thrust. I've been spending most of my time the last 35 or 40 years traveling not only all over the United States, but globally to share this message. And it's great. I agree with Helena that we're seeing progress being made. I think it's the most important thing really to understand that animal agriculture and the mentality of herding animals, of seeing other beings as objects, as mere commodities. We buy and sell them by the pound. So this is an attitude of materialism that's very deeply embedded in our culture now. It's been going on for 10,000 years. And so part of what I'm trying to do is help people realize that we've been doing this for 10,000 years, and this has spread pretty much worldwide, and it's led directly to the ancient Sanskrit word gavya, which means war. Whatever we do to animals, we do eventually to other human beings. So slavery, owning animals and then owning humans, force medicating them, tracking them, all these things. And I'm really concerned that we're seeing humanity now being turned into livestock itself more and more, because as you sow, so shall you reap. And we're sowing these seeds. And I've been warning about this for decades, that if we're going to continue to insist on exploiting and oppressing and abusing animals on a massive scale, the boomerang effect, what we sow, it comes back to us. So I'm really hoping that people will begin to realize that the only reason any of us eats animal foods is because we're just following orders. We're doing what we've been essentially told to do from the time we're little infants, like I was for the first 20 or so years. And if we can begin to, as Helena said, unlearn what we've learned, question that basic paradigm of domination and exploitation of animals, and realize that we can feed everyone on a fraction of the land and water and resources, and we can allow habitat to heal and soil to heal and the oceans to heal, because we're overfishing. We're cutting down rainforests now at 4 or 5 acres per second to feed, to grow soybeans, to feed imprisoned cows and pigs and chickens and fishes and so forth. So the environmental devastation, the cultural devastation of hunger, of armies of slaughterhouse workers who do nothing but stab animals all day. It's webs of trauma that radiate into our society on every level, into the environment, traumatizing animals, wildlife. Indigenous people are getting slaughtered by animal agriculture, and the whole mentality of might makes right. And that's the problem. I'll just close with that. Just the underlying idea that it's really a Trojan horse, this animal agriculture. It looks like a good thing. It looks like we get protein and calcium, but it just destroys everything. And it especially attacks our inherent intelligence and sensitivity, our ability to make connections. My PhD at Berkeley was in education, and intelligence is this capacity to make connections. But with animal agriculture, we don't want to make connections. We don't want to think about where our cheese came from, where the meat came from, the flesh that we're eating. So we learn to stay shallow and not look deeply, not feel deeply, not care deeply. And so the sacred feminine dimension of life, which is especially abused in animal agriculture, because animal agriculture requires not only killing and imprisoning animals, but impregnating them against their will and stealing their babies on a massive scale. So it's sexual abuse of women, of female animals and of children, and it plants the seeds for all the problems that we're seeing in our world. So the underlying final idea is that we human beings are not flawed. We're not violent and abusive and warlike by nature. We're born into a society with an obsolete food orientation. For some reason, 10,000 years ago, in what is today Iraq, people thought they needed to begin owning wild sheep, wild goats, and then later wild cows and other animals as property for food. That was the last great revolution in our society, and it changed everything. And we're still in a herding culture, and we're still dominating and exploiting animals and justifying it and rationalizing it. And as long as that happens, we're going to have war and exploitation and globalization. So it's really essential, I think, for us to get to the root of the problem. And the good news is that we are, I think, at our core, connected with the earth and with each other and with animals in an empathic way. It's just that our meals, which are our most fundamental connection with nature and and the earth just take us away from that every day. So to really go deeply into that, I think is still the most important thing for us to do, underlying everything else.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Will. Very good. Sort of laying out some of the challenges. Elisabet, can we just see if we can hear you? Okay. What I'm going to do, Elisabet, is we're going to go on with the conversation. I will send you a link where you can call in so we can hear what you have to share. No, she's saying that won't work, I think, Gary. So looks like there's a challenge there. So what we have, Helena and Will, is obviously a massive challenge, across the board with food. You see recent conflicts in Europe have complicated again, adding to famine and food shortages, and this, just access to vitalizing food as a basic core need for everybody has got to be a part of growing towards a sustainable, lasting peace on Earth and with Earth. And we're very grateful for your both of your expertise and wisdom in this regard. I just want to present the 7 core needs, and then we'll come back to getting into the conversation. So the 7 core needs are the second primary directive of eco-governance. Back in World Unity Week, which was in June, we started the 99 Days of Peace through Unity, which is leading up to the International Day of Peace on Wednesday, and then the final day, 99, on Saturday, the 24th of September. But back in World Unity Week, we had the 7 foundations of life, which also coming from eco-governance, Dr. Shelley Ostroff and Jan Golding, who are here with us. And those 7 foundations are earth, water, fire, air, climate, biodiversity, and the web of life. And this is the first primary task of eco-governance, is to re-establish right relationship with those foundations of life. And the second task of eco-governance is to ensure access for all humans and animals to these 7 core needs. So there is a little video, just a very short one, a beautiful little video that's been made that I want to present. We are day 3. My apologies for my confusion. Of course, it's day 4 in Australia. It's easy to lose track, but we are day 3. Day 1 was living soil. Day 2 was healthy water, and today is about vitalizing food, and then fresh, clean air tomorrow. So just bear with me while I bring up the video on the core needs, which I think will help kind of frame today as well. So just bear with me while I bring that up. Very good. Will, while I'm doing that, when was the book published? When was the first edition of the World Peace Diet?
It was published in 2005.
2005,
actually.
Great. Okay.
Right. Yeah. It came out, and we did a 10-year anniversary one in 2015, and I've got another one on the way here.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, here we go. Seven core needs are framing the discussion we're having through Peace Week, and the general understanding there is for the community that is orientated towards peace and towards unity, ensuring access of all humans and animals to these 7 core needs is a necessary condition for the world we want to create and co-create together. So let's Let's dive into it a little bit deeper, Helena. We are, really looking into this theme of vitalizing food. What would you say? And you're a great person to ask this question to, as is Will. What would you say are the optimal local to global strategies for ensuring the guaranteed access of all humans and animals to vitalizing food? And what are the whole system's healing benefits of such a strategy? And Helena, as you're answering this question, I'd love to hear more about your passion for localization and how it relates to those who are working more at the global level and obviously around this particular issue of food, which is so central for everybody.
Yeah, well, again, as I said earlier, from my point of view, things have gone so wrong, not because of agriculture, but because of the way that global elites, and they were global traders, were able to dominate humanity. And when I saw what happened in Ladakh, I feel in a way I was witnessing what in many parts of the world had happened 500 years earlier, because the conquest that went out from Europe started about 500 years ago, and it was very much aided by a type of misguided Christianity, where from Europe, people spread to conquer people. And when they conquered them, even with the Christian worldview, they created a sense of inferiority in local peoples around the world. And many environmentalists until now have thought that agriculture is when everything went wrong. But what we really need to look at is how agriculture in the hands of elites and global trade, that's where things have gone hideously wrong. Actually, most indigenous people did, in many cases, keep animals or eat animal products. But in my experience in Ladakh, it was with absolutely deep consciousness about this sort of sin of taking a life. It was with conscious concern. It was with a loving and compassionate approach to animals. And they did take animal lives. So Will and I think we agree about everything. The only thing is, I would say we need to look at the bigger picture to see that it's not agriculture that's the problem, as many environmentalists have thought. And it's not the use of animals that's the central problem. The central problem has been the domination of certain groups over others. And most frighteningly of all, is the way that this global empire has gained strength, particularly in the last 35, 40 years. In the last 35, 40 years, our governments have been systematically giving more freedom, to global businesses and banks. After 2008, the whole world was aware of the abuse of power by a few men sitting in a gambling casino, playing with the lives of people, mortgages, trading, no idea who those people were, no, in any way, experiential knowledge of the impact they were having on people's lives and the lives of animals. So the animal factory industrial agriculture is by no doubt the most cruel, the most hideous, the most toxic imaginable use for profit in this extractive capitalist system. It's very understandable that people are now focusing on that. But I really want to urge all of you to look more broadly, because I think what we'll see is that very often, Will, you were saying we, but actually we didn't do it. We didn't create animal factories. We were victims of a system where already back 40 years ago, giant corporations convinced doctors that we should be eating trans fats and that trans fats were healthier than animal fat because they didn't want to have to deal with something that will go off in a short period. They created trans fats that could be transported across the world. So the whole system that we're in now is based on creating import and export of the same product on a daily basis The US is exporting beef and turning around and importing as much beef. The UK exports as much milk and butter as it imports. In order to gain power for global corporations, you have to destroy self-reliance. So the solution where we need to be going is towards much more diversified, self-reliant, local economies. And by the way, we were never self-reliant, we were community reliant. We evolved in intergenerational groups where the connection between the youngest and the oldest meant that we created a collaborative structure that was circular. And I've lived in that, and I can say that this meant that you weren't afraid of growing old. It meant that as a young person or as a mother, every mother had 10 caretakers for every child, live-in caretakers for every child. It created a very different sense of identity. We're not going to be moving towards that overnight, but we are moving towards more localized, community-based economies. And I'm seeing in the worldwide local food movement these beautiful examples of how people working with each other in community and with life. That beautiful video we just saw. I see people with genuine concern and love for life, cleaning water, creating ecosystems that are thriving. And they actually include farms where there are animals. I see love and care for those animals. And in the traditional culture, at least of Ladakh, I'm not saying that every traditional culture was like that, but what I experienced was that it was very good for young people to grow up caring for animals. We can't and we shouldn't care for wild animals, but actually having animals that they cared for, seeing 6-year-old boys carrying the newborn goat or the newborn calf, just like they carried their siblings, created, actually, we now understand, even a different hormone fabric for young men. The care and nurture for animals, the care and nurture for young children. So I am painting here a slightly different picture from you, Will, but I really feel we're on the same page because we're seeing that in this system, in the global system, our arms have grown so long, we can't see our impact. So we're abusing people on the other side of the earth. We're abusing people that are, and now again, I'm saying we, but we are victims of this. We didn't choose to have someone on the other side of the world use toxic chemicals to produce for us. We didn't choose to have factories that are the most hideous, cruel, toxic, these factory farms. We didn't choose to do that. We've been victims. And I would argue that we're suffering above all from the blindness that comes from the fact that no one has stepped back to look at the global economic system and its impact globally. This is why I also feel a lot of compassion and kindness for people inside the biggest corporations who are part of this, whether they're young boys speculating in the casino, playing with people's lives so they don't even know where they are or the impact. In the same way, in Unilever, when they now boast about caring about biodiversity, there are people in those corporations who are not being forced to sit down to look at the genuine global impact of what global banks and businesses are doing. So I'm arguing that the biggest cause of our problems is blindness, that the best way to understand what's going on in the world and to understand this difference between more localized, bioregional economies where people know the impact they have on the water, on the soil, on the animals, and on each other, where we can see the impact. We can benefit from experiential knowledge. We can benefit from human scale chains of information, where we have, as a fundamental pillar of our knowledge, is greater experience. That's where we can also develop our intuition. That's where we can develop our deeper sensibilities. We are now in a world where we are dominated by abstract concepts, mediated by giant institutions, be they now giant academic institutions, media institutions. The voice of the world today is the voice of money, where concentrations of money allow that perspective to get out. So every knowledge space, every university, every media, every avenue of knowledge has been colonized by big money. But the drivers of that money creation now are above all algorithms. And they're aided by people who are, yes, earning huge fat salaries. Maybe some of them are sociopaths. At the grassroots, there's an assumption that everyone inside these institutions is a sociopath or psychopath. I do not subscribe to that. I really see blindness, and it grows. As you gain power, you are more and more dependent on mediated information, more and more dependent on abstractions about reality, no experiential knowledge base. And to have the experiential knowledge that we need, unfortunately, we would need research around the world in every culture. We would need people to actually see the impact of this globalized, centralized, very, very dangerous system of control. And I think that, so the spiritual sense of connectedness, the spiritual sense of oneness, I feel that when I'm in nature. When I'm under that tree, when I'm under the sky, that I am here, I feel at one with the universe. And I experienced that in both the traditional culture of Ladakh and in the modern incarnation of indigenous. Indigenous means localized. The modern indigenous localized people who are deeply connected to the living earth, not in front of a screen, looking at numbers, listening to verbal abstractions that mediate our relationship to the living world. That's where people awaken to their genuine spiritual connectedness to life. That's where they then develop the deep compassion and the care. We cannot do that. We cannot do that in a globalized system where our arms have grown so long, we can't see our impact. We can go to the supermarket and we can believe that by reading the label, we are now shopping ethically. No, it's a fraud. It absolutely does not correspond to the reality on the ground. And the reality is so complex. So my main plea for localization is the plea to move away from the hubris that has grown with our educational path, that developed our left brain over our whole brain, developed a split in us where we no longer listen to our body. We didn't listen to our gut. We didn't listen to the soil under our feet. We were trained to listen to abstractions, and that leads to hubris. It leads to a great simplification of life. Once we come back to the local, and we now are looking at the people on whom we depend or collaborate with, or at least have a name for the people in the institutions of power. There's a face, there's a name. We can relate to the complexity of life. That complexity forces us to be humble. So my book, Ancient Futures, and the film we made were translated between them into over 40 languages. And I had, from all over the world, I had the message, oh, the story of Ladakh is our story too. We went through the same traumatic cutting off from nature, pushed into a city to compete. Now suddenly the rest of human beings are the enemy. On the land, in a more localized economy, we needed each other. In the city, the other becomes an obstacle, and we were cut off from our own roots in nature and forced to compete with one another, cut off from the intergenerational, structurally collaborative social fabric, structurally. I just want to point out quickly that when we put 31-year-olds into a room in a kindergarten, we're doing exactly what we're doing to the chickens, and we create elbows and friction. keeping children in their monoculture their whole formative period is a disaster. One of the first things we would do in education is to be sure to have much more mixed interaction. One of the first things we need to be doing to create more humanity, more compassion, is to move out of this monocultural prison. And it's also just finally to say that this global system that is now disseminating information from centralized for-profit institutions, that knowledge is monocultural. And I would argue monoculture is deadly. It's anti-life, whether human monoculture or biological monoculture. The path towards regenerating, flourishing diversity, human cultural diversity, but also genuine individualism where a child can feel confident in who he or she is. Dare I say he or she? But anyway, that child can feel confident in who they are. It requires the deep respect for diversity. And we can only do this through global collaboration. We desperately need international information exchange, cultural exchange, deeper knowledge about what's going on the ground, as we're doing in this wonderful program, more exchange so we can collaborate to move towards not isolationism, towards thriving cultures where we can be supporting each other and where we're shrinking our footprint so that we're not robbing either other animals, wild or domesticated, or other people of their right to thriving ecosystems and careful use of those gifts of nature, of the water, the soil, every earthworm, the specifics of place. That's where we come alive again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Helena, for that very compelling narrative and framing of the issues. And of course, there's going to be nuances of approach. Naturally, that's part of the beauty and the wonder of being human. Is there's always going to be those nuances of approach, and just wanting to affirm the general sense of overwhelming agreement within those nuances of approach. Elisabet, will you just, and if I can ask Will just to hold patient for a little while we test Elisabet again on her audio. Hi, Elisabet.
Oh,
No, unfortunately.
oh, what a pity. I can't believe it.
No, but it's great.
And it wouldn't work for you to speak on your phone? We could hear your voice.
If you ring that phone number, Elisabet, if you ring the phone number, I can even, you're in the US. It's I'll put it in the chat again for you.
Oh,
and Ati is already in the room as well.
And Artie, welcome. Artie is here as well. So I did see, I'm not sure if Artie's got her video on. Oh, here's Artie as well. So we'll welcome Artie up. Artie, hello. Greetings. We will hear from Will, Dr. Will Tuttle, answering the question, what do you see as the optimal local to global strategies for ensuring the guaranteed access of all humans and animals to vitalizing food? And I suppose you may want to respond to some of Helena's remarks as well, Will, but great to hear what you'd like to share.
Okay, thanks so much, Ben, and thanks everyone. Thank you, Helena. And I think, everything that you were saying, Helena, just now, I think is really very important. And the underlying pattern of colonialism and the domination of nature, of animals and of indigenous people, you're right. I mean, it victimizes really all of us. I mean, being born into a society. But I do have to say that from my point of view, of the research I've been doing the last 45 years and so forth, is there's a template of animal agriculture that is very much worse than we realize. And for these young kids, I know it's wonderful for them to care for their sheep and care for the goats and so forth. But at a certain point, they're going to put a knife to their throat and kill them. And that's the purpose of having them, is to kill them and to take their milk and so forth. So I understand that there's perhaps a place in certain environments where this may be necessary climatically. I'm not interested really in specifically saying that certain cultures have to, indigenous cultures especially, have to change. But the overall thing that's happened, I think we have to see the big flow here, that when 10,000 years ago we started, certain people in Iraq started to herd animals, and then those cultures gradually developed a wealthy elite class, and the domination of women, and the role model for young boys to emulate was the hard, tough, disconnected male. And you needed more land because you have more animals and more, and war was always about wealth. It was about the wealthy elite getting more capital. The first word for war is the ancient Sanskrit word gavya, which means the desire for more cows. And the oldest word for that we have for, like, our word capitalism, comes from the word capita, which means head, as in head of sheep and goats and cows and so forth. So we have to see the roots, I think, of the system that you're talking about and that we're all addressing here, of the final stages after 10,000 years of expanding, spreading from the Eastern Mediterranean to the Northern Mediterranean to Central Asia to Europe, and then eventually spreading worldwide. And we're all born into that herding culture, which started small and spread. And this is this revolution that happened that, in a sense, was a pretty toxic revolution, in the sense that it separated us from nature and from animals in a very harmful way. So as you say, we're victims of that. We're born into that. I was forced as a little kid, like most of us were, to sit at the table and eat the flesh and secretions of horribly abused animals and just feel like this is great. And when I was 13 years old, I went away to summer camp and I killed my own chickens and we killed our own cows and we did all that. I've participated in killing animals when I was younger, and I thought it was the right thing to do because this is what we all do, and a man's got to do what a man's got to do, and so forth, because we need to get our protein and we need to get our calcium and so forth. But fortunately for me, and I think this is happening to lots of people, I began to reflect and go inward, and I began to question things and the Vietnam War, and started to practice yoga and study Zen and discover Eastern religion and study and indigenous traditions as well, and just ended up becoming a Zen Buddhist monk and spent thousands of hours in meditation. So I was just sitting with my own mind in silence from 3 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night. For months on end, just sitting in silence. And I realized what you're saying too, Helena, that my mind had been colonized. I had been born into a culture where I think we're born into the world with tremendous capacities. And I love the beautiful video you talked, the final thing is that we fulfill our human potential with healthy water, air, soil, and relationships and so forth. And so that's possible. That's the beautiful thing to remember, is that this earth is not only beautiful. We've all noticed that, right? That the earth is beautiful. It's not only beautiful, and the beauty of the earth inspires us to protect the earth, but it's also, the earth is abundant. We can easily feed everyone on a fraction of the land and the resources if we would eat plants directly. So to answer the main question, the way forward is basically to move to a plant-based way of eating for as many people as possible. I mean, that should be the goal, because even according to the most conservative groups, we could free up the amount of land of Europe, United States, Australia, and Mexico, over 1 billion hectares, if people would move to a plant-based way of eating. We wouldn't have to grow massive monocropped fields of genetically engineered corn and soy and alfalfa to feed all these imprisoned cows and pigs and chickens and factory farm fishes, which is what's happening right now, polluting and destroying ecosystems and causing massive starvation, because people could be eating these food. We have 1 billion of our brothers and sisters going hungry because we're growing huge amounts of food and feeding it to wealthy people who live in industrialized nations. We have high-powered economies, so it is not difficult for us to drive up the price of grain on the world market and feed it to our imprisoned cows and pigs and chickens and other animals, while people in less industrialized nations don't have enough money to even buy the grain. And they're, as you said, they're forced off their land by large-scale corporations that are taking their land and forcing them into cities. And so this whole thing drives a wealthy elite to get more and more wealth and power. And there's no profits in healthy people. There's no profits really in peaceful, happy people, right? The profits are in sick people, chronically ill people, and war and environmental devastation. That's where the real profits are. The big chemical companies, petroleum companies, pharmaceutical, medical companies, fast food companies, these, and the bankers in the background that get all their money by making the loans to keep this whole thing going, and the military that keeps it all in place. And so we're born into that, and we're taught to eat the foods of the overlords, animal foods, which basically forces us to shut down our natural compassion and caring, because we cannot eat the flesh of tortured animals, no matter where they come from, even if they come from small local places. This is the thing we have to really understand. I mean, I've traveled all over the world and gone to animal sanctuaries, for example, like where a few animals have escaped the gulag, and they're taken care of usually by vegan people who are just letting them be ambassadors for the rest of the cows and pigs and chickens and turkeys and goats and sheep and other animals that are being abused. And so when I asked the sanctuary operators about the animals themselves, like some animals come from factory farms, some animals come from small backyard operations, and I say, like, which animals when they arrive here have been the most severely abused? Pretty much everywhere I go, Australia or United States or Europe, the answer is pretty much the same, that very often it's the animals from the small backyard operations that are the more severely abused, even than the animals from factory farms. And factory farms are terrible. I've been to factory farms. I've been to slaughterhouses and stockyards. I mean, it's horrific abuse to these animals. But backyard operations aren't necessarily better. Animals very often bring out, animal agriculture, it doesn't necessarily bring out the best in people. It can bring out the worst in people, because you're going to kill that animal eventually. And you don't know what goes on behind the scenes, and people, and the neglect of the animals. We shouldn't be owning beings. Owning beings is himsa. Himsa means violence. When I say I own you, I own a being, that's violence. I've stolen their sovereignty. I mean, fundamentally, that's it. That's the great dilemma. I know Ladakh is a Buddhist country. I mean, I studied Buddhism. I lived in a Tibetan Buddhist center. So I understand this is complex, but I'm not in any way interested in judging anyone. I just think it's important to look at the bigger picture and realize that animal agriculture does bring out the worst in us. Ultimately, it does, because we are going to kill them. We are always reducing those animals to a means. They're a means for our ends. We're going to eat them, or we're going to take from them. We're going to steal their purposes, because these animals for millions of years lived and celebrated their lives in nature for millions of years, right? This has only been going on for a few thousand years. So when we take away their purposes and say this, now you're mine, we're trained into that, right? It's something we're indoctrinated into. That's the point.
Thanks,
so
it's not,
the whole idea is
that
the whole idea, I think.
We have to keep in mind that all indigenous people ate animals, domesticated.
Okay, I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just saying that this is the, indigenous people, hunting animals is different than herding, first of all. I mean, hunting is not the same. I think we understand that. But let me just make a few points, and then we can have a discussion, right? Okay, but I think, I'm not in favor of hunting animals either. I think ultimately, we can see, we don't know how people lived far way back, right? I mean, I taught college courses in mythology, and it's very interesting to see that virtually there's a monomyth, a world myth of a golden age, or of a garden, or of an earlier time when we lived in harmony with animals, where they were free living. And maybe there was an earlier time, we're not aware of it now, where we did live in harmony with animals, and we didn't herd them, and we didn't hunt them, and we didn't kill them, and we get all the nutrients that we need to be healthy from plants. Because there's two kinds of agriculture. When someone says they're a farmer, you got to say, well, what
just 1 minute, Will, 1 minute, because I think we're going to go to Elisabet. So yeah, if you can complete your thought in 1 minute.
Okay. All right, so I'll just say this closing point that agriculture early on was done by women. It was women's work, and it really brings out the best in people because you're working with the beautiful abundance. Right? I plant one seed, I get 1,000 seeds. I plant it, a tree, and it just gives. It doesn't charge for the apples or anything. This is something that's beautiful, and we're working with the natural harmonies. And so I think this is the way of the future is local farmers markets. But animal agriculture from the beginning was men's work, and you had to imprison them, you had to fight them, you had to harm them and kill them, and it brought out the worst in people ultimately. So I think we have to just understand that difference in agriculture.
Thank you very much, Will. This is obviously a very passionate subject, and one which is going to evoke a lot of strong sensitivities. We are going to be hearing from an Indigenous perspective too soon with Artie Kigwa, who's here, and we want to welcome Artie. But I think Elisabet's managed to connect via phone. Elisabet Sahtouris, hello.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Hallelujah, we can hear you. Yes, the voice of the goddess. So, Elisabet, yes, we can hear you. I'm going to shortcut your introduction. We'll put it in the links to the description, just to give you a chance to jump in and to share anything that you've been listening for the last a little while, and around this idea of access to
I can
vitalizing
do
food.
it, Ben.
Go ahead.
I can introduce myself.
Okay.
Oh, hi, everybody. Aloha, aloha from Hawaii. And I'm jumping into something I wrote a whole article about 2 years ago called Ending the Food Wars. I'm in, wait a minute now. It's asking me again.
We can
to
hear you.
unmute.
We can hear you through the phone. You're good. You're good.
Okay. Anyway, I'm an evolution biologist. Oh, you muted me again.
Just your computer. Your computer. Leave your computer muted.
Okay.
You're getting an echo.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyway, I am an evolution biologist in order to be a good futurist. If you don't know the past, it's hard to see where to go in the future. And I've been passionately interested in the food issue. And hello, dear Helena. It's so good to see you. I was introduced to the global agricultural situation really by Vandana Shiva, our dear friend. Helena knows her well, with her book, The Violence of the Green Revolution. And then, of course, I read Ancient Futures as soon as it was out, and I keep thinking I read it way before 1991. I don't know if we were in communication before that, but anyway, those two books, of course, influenced me greatly, as did a UN report which came out about maybe 10 years ago, saying that the only way to a better food future on the planet was through small family farms. And small family farms, of course, are almost always made of plants and animals. As an evolution biologist, I know that from billions of years ago, when the first bacteria evolved into two kinds, one of which emitted carbon dioxide and the other oxygen, and that alliance has held up ever since. Native people sometimes say, sing to a tree. And in modern science terms, that would mean give it your carbon dioxide as it gives you its oxygen. Now, the other thing I am passionate about is plant advocacy. Dear Will, I am a great plant advocate, and I'm very sad that vegans don't seem to understand that plants are even more sentient than animals. Wonderful book by Stephen Mancuso called Brilliant Green, showing that plants have all our 5 senses, and we've already measured a dozen more than animals have. They don't need eyes as animals. You know, I used to say animals are plants that lost their chloroplasts, so they couldn't make food in place, and they had to evolve all these other things, from the musculoskeletal system to the perception to the weaponry to the digestive processing, all in order to deal with food. because they were kind of inferior plants. So I put plants really on the top in evolution, and I have dear tree friends with whom I commune a lot because I learned that you can do that. Anyway, this plant sentience is vitally important because plants and animals really do belong together. The family farm is the solution, and I don't understand why all the people crusading for healthy food aren't on one side against all factory farming of plants and animals. It's not just animals that are being tortured, the plants are being tortured. And I was once with a very interesting group of people. There was an Eskimo and his wife, and there were two vegans at the lunch table. And one of the Eskimos said to one of the vegans, "You did not order a salad, did you?" And they said, "Yes." "Think how many lives you take in one salad." And they changed their order to zucchini sticks. It's just a funny little comeback. Now, there are parts of the world that have been destroyed for agriculture, like the steppes, the great steppes of the Middle East and Asia that Helena knows so well about. And the only way to restore those steppes is to restore hoofed animals on them. The Savory Institute has been restoring desertified lands for many years now by restoring the animals, because the plants can't survive the dry seasons on their own. They require the hoofs to break up the grass and the fertilizer of the animals to keep the soil bacteria going through the dry season. So there are so many examples in evolution of showing the importance. Why I think that the greatest mistake we made in agriculture was to separate plants from animals into different monocultures, where we had to artificially feed each side, and we turned one solution into two problems, you know? So there's so much going on for me here. I believe that what's the most important thing that we need to do in the future is to recognize the need for healthy food, which all four of us certainly do, and to crusade for healthy food, and stop telling each other what to eat, because there are cultures on the planet that don't have never had access to a lot of fruits and veggies, who could live, you know, on only animal food. My own children, independently, went all the way from vegetarian in one case and vegan in the other to they're on paleo diets now. Am I going to tell them what to do when they're suddenly saying, "Oh my God, this all-meat diet is making me feel better than I've ever felt in my life"? No, I let people make their own choices. And we must be open to people making their own choices about what their bodies thrive on. I have no problem with people choosing their own diets, providing that they're eating healthy food. So I don't want to rant on too long here, and I don't mean it as a rant. I'm just so passionate about plants. I love them so much. And it hurts me when vegans only talk about the torture of animals and not about the torture of plants. Think nothing of ripping a carrot from the ground and sinking their teeth into it. You know, nobody does that with an animal anymore. You don't, grab a pig and bite into it. And there are ways, as Helena has pointed out so very clearly, where indigenous peoples almost always had plant and animal diets, almost always, not entirely the case, as I just said, with the people who had to live on meat only, and there are some that live on veg only. And Helena's Ladakh people are primarily vegetarians, but they don't rule out meat, and they love their animals. And when a tree is cut, I hurt as badly as when I see an animal killed. And I pray to those trees. They've been cut down in my neighborhood now for weeks. huge numbers of trees that beautiful birds were nesting in and that were giving us oxygen and all those wonderful things plants give us. And so I'm in pain about the cruel deaths of plants and animals. I really am. And I think that we are being separated by big agriculture, which, by the way, has taken over vegans by saying we're going to live on vegan VAT food, not fat food, but made in VAT food that is more toxic. And when meat diets are compared, they lump Spam together with grass-fed, out in the open loved beef. So I could go on all day. I don't want to. I'm aware that we're over our time, and I'm thrilled that I got to weigh in. And I hope that we can here among us make some kind of peace in which we agree to fight for healthy food without insisting that our way is the only way, our particular diet is the only way forward. I can prove to you the restoration of desertified land through animal agriculture. There's so much, that we can say, but let me stop on that note and pray that we can come out of this meeting with some kind of a happy agreement about healthy food. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can I just say a quick? I feel like I'd like to respond to that.
Okay, just real quick, because we want to get to
just
Artie.
quick. I mean, the whole point actually of veganism is compassion for animals and ecosystems and plants. I mean, that's the thing to really understand. We love trees. We love ecosystems. It's about ahimsa, nonviolence. We're cutting down rainforests at 4 or 5 acres per second, the massive destruction of rainforest to grow soybeans to feed imprisoned cows and pigs and chickens. Biologists who understand and study animal agriculture say that anyone who's a vegan saves around 100 trees a year, right? Eating plants, you save 100 trees a year because we're cutting down. Look, I lived in an RV for 17 years traveling around North America. Most of North America has been reduced to massive monocropped fields of corn and soy. Prairies have been destroyed, forests have been destroyed. It's because it takes at least 10 between and this is varying depending on which expert, but between 4 and 15 times as much land to feed people eating animal-based foods. So you have to cut down the trees and destroy ecosystems and overfish the oceans. We're feeding half of the fish that we catch now to cows and pigs and chickens and to other factory farmed fish. So, we have to really understand this, that like Voltaire said, if we believe absurdities, we'll commit atrocities. And that's the problem. We have to
But Will, you
reduce
are
our
aware,
environmental
you are
footprint,
aware
and that
that
means
these
eating
people-
lower on the food chain. We have
But
to eat
Will,
lower on the food chain because
aren't
it
you
takes too
aware-
much land and too many trees.
They would
And
be
that's just how it
clear-cutting
is.
for soybeans for humans as well. That's what's happening because the problem is not the
It's
animal.
doing. See,
sorry.
the thing is, we live in an animal agriculture society that's based on dominating the earth, and so now we do plant agriculture the way we do animal agriculture. We use monocropping. We use
It's
chemicals
not
and fertilizer.
we,
So the
it's the
whole idea
population.
is to do plant agriculture the way we should do plant agriculture, in a feminine way, where we have small scale local gardens, like you're saying, with communities and caring for the
I'm
earth.
gonna jump in
Small
here.
scale.
I'm gonna
So
jump
we're-
in here.
that's the thing.
We're going to jump in here because we do have another speaker who hasn't shared yet, and we're very honored and grateful to have Artie Kikwa here to share from her perspective. And I will give Artie an introduction. Thank you, Elisabet, for your sharing. I really, really appreciate. We don't hear you anymore, but thank you, Elisabet, for your sharing. If you stay with us, we can unmute your phone a little later. You'll need to control that at your end. Let me introduce, and we're going to switch to English. So for the English speakers in the Zoom room, go down to translate and select English to hear what Artie has to say. Artie Kigwa is an indigenous Iku Arhuaca public administrator from the Escuela Superior de Administración Pública. She has a master in government and public policy from the Universidad don't do live transcriptions because I won't understand. I'm going to decline that, Danilia. Sorry. From the Universidad Externa de Colombia and currently a doctoral student in political studies at the same university. Councilwoman of Bogota in the periods between 2004 and 2007, and currently for the period 2020 to 2023 for the Indigenous and Social Alternative Movement, a political platform where most of the indigenous peoples of Colombia are unified and of which she serves as spokeswoman. There's a lot more to Ati Kigua's rich history. Her political work is focused on the defense of environmental heritage, the exploration and recovery of ancestral food customs, and the role of youth and women in these struggles. So we have much to hear from and much to learn. Welcome, Ati. I'm going to ask you to unmute here. Welcome, Ati, to Peace Week, and we look forward to hearing what you have to share.
Tina mujina azimezare juminaji nuku nandi atikigwa zaki nukwani aviri joavika manakanakwabani zeizei nazani. Un saludo para los organizadores, para los panelistas y para la gente que está en esta semana internacional reflexionando sobre la paz, la no violencia que está también en nuestro plato. Me parece de la mayor relevancia saludarlos en nombre de los pueblos indígenas, en especial de Colombia, porque hoy el futuro de la biosfera de alguna manera depende de los saberes, del sistema de conocimientos que existen en los pueblos indígenas. El 80% de la biodiversidad, de la agrobiodiversidad, depende del sistema de conocimientos, fundamentalmente las mujeres, más de 7,000 lenguas que son formas de pensar, de habitar este mundo, fundamental. Entonces, entender la Amazonía como un ecosistema fundamental para el futuro de nuestro hogar, la tierra, la Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, el corazón del mundo. Entonces, quiero saludar este espacio y contarles que como vocera del movimiento indígena en el espacio de Bogotá, creo que las ciudades tienen un rol muy importante en ayudar a transitar hacia un hábitat respetuoso de todos los seres y especies de la tierra. Eso dice nuestra ley de origen. Entonces, quiero contarles que los suelos, la tierra para nosotros es un organismo vivo, respira. Y hay incluso unos pequeños microorganismos que son los que transforman la materia orgánica de los cuales dependen nuestros suelos. Una problemática a nivel global es todo el impacto de la revolución verde y cómo se han desertificado los suelos. En el caso de Colombia, queremos en Bogotá y también a nivel del país que existan políticas para cuidar los suelos, para salvaguardar los suelos de vocación agrícola. Es el caso de la sabana de Bogotá, que son suelos de origen volcánico y que deberían ser preservados para hacer una reserva agroalimentaria. Sin embargo, en las ciudades muchas veces se sacrifican los suelos que pueden producir nuestra alimentación para la especulación inmobiliaria. Es muy importante en el marco de la pandemia empezar como sociedad a trabajar en apropiarnos del ciclo agroalimentario. La primera base es cuidar nuestros suelos. Lo segundo es tener mercados locales, un comercio justo para pagarle a nuestros productores de alimento y un consumo consciente. Necesitamos también cuidar lo que comemos, porque somos lo que comemos, hace parte de nuestra identidad. En el caso de Colombia, pues somos un país agrobiodiverso, con mucha diversidad de plantas. Por ejemplo, en hongos que se pueden comer hay más de 1,500 especies. Colombia hace parte de los países mega biodiversos. Por área, es el país que mayor número de plantas, de especies tiene. Entonces, tenemos que construir un país a la altura de un proyecto civilizatorio alternativo que significa el buen vivir, que viene de los pueblos, cómo celebramos la diversidad en la cultura humana. Y esto es una invitación cordial en esta Semana de la Paz a que luchemos juntos contra la homogenización, contra la uniformidad. Nuestra mayor riqueza como seres humanos es la diversidad cultural, que se expresa en formas de ser, de habitar, en culturas, en formas de alimentarnos, en formas de producción. Eso es fundamental. Esa es la base de la paz entre los pueblos, entre las naciones, de la gran familia de la tierra. Todos somos hijos de la tierra. Empezar a reconocer esta raíz indígena es empezar a reencontrarnos en una humanidad común como hijos de la tierra, como hijos de este cosmos que estamos en un viaje de la vida juntos. Entonces, creo que hay que trascender las fronteras que son propias del colonialismo, del patriarcado, de un modelo económico que explota y maltrata a la madre tierra y a sus hijos. Y también defender la diversidad en la naturaleza, o sea, la biodiversidad, como dos principios esenciales del buen vivir, y eso significa salir de las mentalidades, de los discursos, de los modelos económicos que quieren uniformar la tierra para que todos realmente estemos como uniformados. Eso es un pensamiento militar. Y yo creo que hablando de la agricultura, el haber aplicado la técnica y la mentalidad de la guerra a la agricultura, a la producción de alimentos, por ejemplo, utilizar los desechos químicos de la Segunda Guerra Mundial para envenenar los suelos, modificar las semillas, eso es violencia para nuestra cultura. Las semillas nosotros las criamos y ellas nos crían a nosotros. Es una relación de interdependencia con la naturaleza. Somos hijos de la tierra y cuidamos nuestra madre. Entonces, en esa relación de interdependencia tenemos que hablar de un mundo, una humanidad, una salud. Y creo que después de esta pandemia tenemos que entender que estamos interconectados, que somos seres interdependientes, que si la tierra tiene salud, tendremos salud. Por eso, transformar nuestros modos de producir, de consumir y sembrar una cultura de paz con la tierra tiene mucho que ver, por supuesto, con hacer una pedagogía en las ciudades, en las grandes ciudades, que son las que más consumen y que muchas veces todo lo que sale de la cocina, los desechos orgánicos, terminan generando una serie de problemáticas ambientales como en Bogotá. En ese sentido, un pilar del buen vivir es el buen comer, la soberanía alimentaria, y hace parte también de nuestra identidad. Entonces somos hijos del maíz. Cada semilla representa un proyecto civilizatorio. Somos de la civilización del maíz. Representa una semilla, contiene 10.000 años de historia, fundamentalmente el trabajo de la mujer. Entonces, hablar de la cultura de la tierra, del culto a la tierra, pues creo que es también parte de lo que quisiéramos también en esta Semana de la Paz Internacional, construir con toda la humanidad, una paz con la naturaleza, una paz con la tierra. Aquí estamos en Colombia, los pueblos pidiendo que llegue la paz, pero más allá de los acuerdos que se hicieron entre la FARC y el Estado, es la paz con la tierra. Y por supuesto sabemos que está en nuestro plato, y eso hace parte pues de una conciencia muy importante, todas las reflexiones que ustedes han hecho sobre la no violencia, que creo que es una temática amplia, pero yo dejo con estas reflexiones iniciales mi participación.
Thank you, Arti, for those very insightful comments. I know you will have provoked a lot of thought from the rest of the panelists and from the audience. And I want to express my appreciation to Pablo, who's done a wonderful job translating both into Spanish, as far as I can tell, and into English, which has been very good. So let's let's just take a breath as we've heard these different perspectives. And just to underline here that we are all part of a common response to something which is deeply dysfunctional, which is the industrialization of agriculture. Now, exactly where we put the emphasis and how thoroughly our focus is, inevitably there will be points of tension and even disagreement. And that's okay. We don't have to agree on everything. But importantly, and you know, we're not going to agree on everything. And I think that's something we have to just start with, that assumption, and that's okay. And then yet, how can we have so much in common? Maybe 98% if you have to quantify it. And we see the scale of destruction of our beautiful planet, and we feel called to intervene, to do something, to respond. I think it's just such a beauty in the work of what you are doing, Helena, and I'm sure that you will have heard in Artie's sharing there a deep localization of their issues and their response. And similarly, what Will is taking on with the ferocity that is required. And a focus which is essential as well. So just to affirm and acknowledge all these different perspectives, and everybody's calling is pure and needed, and you know, obviously the wisdom of Elisabet Sahtouris has got so much to offer for us collectively to go forward in a unified way. Ultimately, we want all humans and animals and plants, Elisabet, to have access to the nourishment that they need without a system of domination, which is hierarchical and causes suffering and the kinds of oppression that we see. And just to affirm your point, Will, that the way we treat the animal shows up in the way we treat each other. And so there's great wisdom here to be shared and to be heard. So perhaps with our closing remarks about how we can go forward together as a movement that's not even yet fully united as a movement globally, but is in the very sort of early stages of what could be a true system of transformation, a system of influence on the planet. Will, you talk about the agricultural revolution as the last revolution. Well, clearly we're in need of the next revolution. So let's close with comments from each of you with how can we move forward to make this a global reality where this means guaranteeing access to vitalizing food, nourishment for humans, animals, and for all of life. And Helena, we're going to start with you.
Yes, I mean, from all my studies for 45 years now, not to demonize people inside the global corporations and banks, but from my point of view, the power that has grown, that started with genocide, patriarchal system, anti-life, has continued to escalate. This frightening concentration of power has been now supported by blindness at the grassroots and inside government. I believe that the way forward has to mean that we move towards community-based, human-scale structures, and we need diversity. We need to have as a priority flourishing diversity on the land. And that means protecting the biodiversity that's there, and it means revitalizing it wherever we can. I am convinced that animals, even animals that will be eaten, need to be part of that cycle in most parts of the world. I would absolutely never insist that everyone has to eat meat. Absolutely not. I myself was vegetarian for decades because I didn't want to kill an animal. But I have seen, and it is a bit of a knife in my heart, Will, when you say that the back garden turkeys are worse off than the factory farmed ones. I have never, ever seen an example of that. And I have seen in Mongolia, for instance, young men who sing songs to their mother, teenage boys, talk about their beautiful mothers, about their breast milk being like the water from the glacier, from the mountain glacier. I've seen a culture that's very feminine, that is entirely based on the use of animals, alive today. And so I feel Also, I want everyone to know that 200 million small farmers, mainly diversified, mainly also including animals, have tried to raise the alarm about the trade treaties that have given global corporations more and more power and that are everywhere destroying small farms. So I'm making a passionate plea for us to be more willing to accept that diversity and not condemn all of those small farms and all of those so-called peasant farmers to go into the city to become more human carnage as a consequence of this global corporate structure.